Welcome to Reflexive Verbs in Spanish. In this first lesson, I will introduce you to the concept of reflexive verbs and what that means in Spanish. And we will look at the different reflexive pronouns and how and when they are used. In a previous lesson, when we talked about the personal a, we also talked about direct objects. And in Spanish, when the direct object or the person doing the action is the same as the person receiving the action, then you're going to be using a reflexive verb, and in conjunction with that, a reflexive pronoun. These types of verbs include the verbs used for any kind of personal care that a person would do, getting dressed, taking a bath, any such thing. Some verbs that are reflexive in Spanish, but not necessarily in English. There are also verbs that might not always be considered reflexive. An example is the verb llamar, but with adding a reflexive pronoun, the verb can then be used as a reflexive verb. And then we have reflexive verbs that are not only reflexive but stem changing. So there are a few different things that we'll be doing with those when we conjugate them. How do I know again when a verb is reflexive? Again, if the subject of the sentence is doing the action to himself or herself. So as I said before, if the object of the sentence and the subject of the sentence are the same person, it is a reflexive verb. And if you're looking a verb up in the dictionary and the verb in the infinitive state in the dictionary ends with the word se, S-E, that's a clear indication that is going to be a reflexive verb. As previously mentioned, in Spanish we have verbs that sometimes can be reflexive and sometimes aren't. And sometimes you just have to know what the verb is. It might not be clear that the object is reflecting back to the subject, but in Spanish you just have to know that that is in fact a reflexive verb. As mentioned, with the reflexive verbs we will always have a reflexive pronoun. If you looked it up in the dictionary or if you see on your vocabulary list, at the end of the infinitive form of the verb, you have the word say. When you conjugate a reflexive verb, not only do you have to conjugate it correctly in the ending and possibly do a stem change, but you have to make sure that the reflexive pronoun matches the subject of the sentence. For myself, it's me. For yourself, familiar, it's te. Himself, herself, or yourself, formal, is se. Ourselves, it's nos. And themselves or yourselves, it's say. You'll notice say happens a few different times in these reflexive pronouns. Third person singular and third person plural is exactly the same. You will tell by context what the subject of the sentence is, who actually is receiving the action. When you're putting the reflexive pronoun in a sentence, it can go one of two places. It will either go before your conjugated verb, as in ella se llama Martha, she calls herself Martha, or tú te vas a vestir, you are going to get dressed. Literally, you are going to dress yourself. Or, if you have both an infinitive verb and a conjugated verb, the reflexive pronoun can be attached to the infinitive verb. Yo tengo que sentarme, as an example, or nosotros queremos bañarnos. I have to sit down. Literally, I have to sit myself. Or we want to bathe ourselves. Notice on both of those that the reflexive pronoun that's attached to the end of the infinitive verb matches the subject. When yo is your subject, it becomes sentarme, where it originally would have been sentarse. Nosotros, you add a nos to the end of bañar, not se. Again, that is part of conjugating the verb, is matching the reflexive pronoun to the subject. So, just a quick review. Can you match the Spanish reflexive pronoun to the subject pronoun? So this is Spanish to Spanish matching. If I have the subject pronoun nosotros, what's my reflexive pronoun? Did you get it? It's nos. For usted, se. For tú, te. For ellos or ellas, you might have guessed it, it's again se. For él or ella, say again. For yo, me. For nosotras, again, nos. And for ustedes, one more time for say. Now can you do the Spanish to English match? Can you match the English pronoun to the Spanish reflexive pronoun? Let's start with ourselves, feminine. That's nos. Yourself, formal. We're back to say. Yourself, familiar. Te. Themselves, either gender. Say again. Himself or herself. Say. Myself. Me. Ourselves, masculine this time. Nos. And yourselves. Say one more time. Did you get them all? If this information feels good, move on to how to use it in conjunction with conjugating your reflexive verbs.